For the next to last project, we are going to change things significantly from what we've done before, and we are going to be making a small scale map, and it's going to end up looking something like this map that you see right here. I'm going to be doing it on the video though, so I won't have quite as much time to change things up and mess around with things as I might otherwise be able to do. But this is what the final result will look like. I'm happy to share a copy of this with you. You're going to create something that's similar to this using the data categories that you select. So let's go on to figuring out how to make a map like this. Okay, I have opened Illustrator back up again, and I have a brand new blank document that I've created here. And I've got Map Publisher running in it. So I'm going to start off by importing some data. And the first thing I'm going to import will be a shapefile. In fact, I'm only importing shapefiles. And I'm going to be getting shapefiles from, first off, the Alaska precinct file, which is called Alaska_precinct shape. And I recommend you start with that one first because it's already projected in Alaska Albers, which is a projection that works for us. And I'll go ahead and say import to that one. And it should end up looking something like this. Now, again, you're going to want to change the artboard a little bit. So if you want to change the artboard so it's just a little bit bigger than this, you are free to do that now or to do it a little bit later when you have the time to do it. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import some other data here. So I'm going back to Data Import. And this time around, I'm going to get something called Alaska 2020. And I'm going to click on that. And this one you see as an unknown projected coordinate system. So it's just going to bring it in as geographic coordinate systems. And because of that, it's going to end up maybe just being sort of squished up here down on the bottom, at least on my screen, that's how it is. We know that, though, now that that's easy to deal with. We like our Alaska precinct one. We're going to take that Alaska 2020 and we are going to just drag it into the precinct projection, and it's going to reproject it for us. And now we'll have them both in the same place looking the same way. We probably want to clean up our map views a little bit here. So I'm going to click on the 2021, which I'm done with now, and delete it. And I'm going to double click on the precinct one, and I'm just going to call it something like Alaska election map. Now the last data set we're going to bring in here is something that we are going to use a little bit later, but we might as well bring it in now just so all the importing is done. And that is going to be a shapefile again, but this time of the Alaska coastline. So let's bring that one in. It's got a coordinate system, but again, it might not be the right projected coordinate system. And so we once again have it sort of sitting over here on the edge, but no problems with that. We can drag it up here, place it in here, and I'm actually going to just then clean up the Alaska coastline thing I dragged in and delete that. So now we have all these layers and they're located up here as well. We can lock these layers so that we're not going to be messing with them in any way. And we are done with that. But let's go take a look at these data and find out what we actually have. So I'm just going to first collect or click on the Alaska precinct area. And I'm going to unlock it and I'm going to click it so it is selected. And then I'm going to go up to the windows and I'm going to open up the Map Publisher Map Attribute window. And I have it coming up on a separate screen, so I'll drag it over here. But here's a whole bunch of data that it has for you. And you can look at the metadata. I have it posted in a separate place for you. But it will show you that you've got U.S. Health District data here, presidential data for 14 and 16, and a bunch of other stuff as well. So that's what that one has, and we'll be using those attributes later on. But I'm going to close it for now, and I'm going to lock that layer, and I'm going to do the same thing with the 2020 layer. I could have left the window open, but I'm used to doing it this way. I click that one open, and here comes up the other attribute data, And then this one you'll see, if I can find where I put that, oops, I popped the window over here to the side and I want to undock that actually, shows data from the 2020 presidential election as well as the Senate and House elections too. So we've got a whole bunch of election data here spanning from 2014 to 2020. So the next thing you want to do is figure out what it is you want to map and what you want to look at. And what I'm going to do for the sample one is I'm going to look at libertarian votes in the 2014 election. And I'm going to again select that, and I'm now going to reopen that attribute data. I know it's just here and I'm sort of repeating stuff, but it probably doesn't hurt to do that. And here's all that attribute data, and I'm actually just going to sort of shrink it a little bit so it fits on the screen better. So hopefully you can see all of this. Now what I would like to do is I would like to find out the percentage of votes that went for the Libertarian candidate versus all other candidates in the United States House 2014 election. But I don't have that. All I have is the raw numbers of the numbers of voters who voted for each of the candidates in each of the precincts. So what I am going to do is I am actually going to create a new attribute column. If I go all the way to the other end here, I'm going to end up adding this at the very end. In order to do that, I first have to click down here on this button that is the Edit Schema button. And that's going to bring up the schema of all the attributes that I have right here. And you can see there the 2014 ones right there, as well as a bunch of other things here. But I'm going to add a new one by going to the plus button down here. And I've got to designate what it's going to be. I am going to call this %L for libertarian. And I don't want it to be an integer. I want it to be a double. That's the same as a real number right there. And then I am actually going to want this to end up being a percentage with 1 decimal point. And so I'm going to actually reduce the number of decimal points to 1. Okay, now, in order to make that column, to populate it, I'm going to have to derive the value from an expression, which essentially means I'm going to have map publisher do a little bit of map for me. And right now you can see that that is empty right there. But it's really easy to edit it. You go to this thing called Expression Builder right here and click on that. And I can literally just create a formula here. So I'm going to create a formula. And the formula is going to look like this. And you might have to spend a little bit of time figuring out exactly what I'm doing here. But I'm essentially going to double click it and it will appear right here. And then these are the various, this is division, right? So I'm going to take the number of votes for Libertarian and I'm going to divide it by the number of votes for all the candidates added together, right? That's how we, of course, make a percentage. And you have to figure out your own little math depending on what you end up wanting to do here. And then I'm actually put parentheses around both of these so I can then multiply it by 100. So I will end up with a nice percentage point. It actually tells me the expression is valid. So I can go ahead and say, okay, there's that expression right now. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say, okay, and see what happens. And if we take a look at the far end, you'll see I've got a new column that's based on a formula, and it gives the percentage vote for Libertarian in each of these voting precincts. I can go ahead and close the attribute table now because it's done. It's in there for me. And I'm actually going to lock everything, sort of make everything look the way it should. The next thing I am going to do is I am going to set up the system that I'm going to use to provide color for this. And the way to do this, sort of the best way to do this, is to open up the swatch window, which is usually linked to the symbol one over here. And then I'm going to go to the swatch library. And I can actually go to map swatches, and you can select things from Color Brewer. And if I go to Color Brewer, red, green, blue, and go to sequential, you can't see this, but there are a whole bunch of different colors that you can choose. And I have chosen for the sequential RGB something called the green color. And here they are right here. They have appeared here, and now they should show up on my swatches as well. But that's what I want to have show up. And if I go down the swatches here, if I've done this correctly, they should show up down here. And I think I actually needed to double click on it. So let's see if I can try that again. Map swatches, RGB to sequential RGB, and then I'm going to double click on the green, and I am going to, oh, I have to choose which folder I want because they're the different colors. Sorry, I forgot to do that. So I have to actually click on the folder right there. And then when I've clicked on the folder, sorry about that little step right here, I should be able to scroll down and those greens are going to appear right here. So my swatches are set up. You should set up the color first. It'll just be easier for you if you choose what colors you want to use. And of course, you can use a couple and then experiment with them if you want to. Now, the next thing I'm going to do, and now I've got my swatches, and I'm just going to move that off, is I am going to go ahead and make a new map theme. So I'm going to click that map theme and go through the same procedure that I've gone through in ones before. I have to call it a style sheet and give it a name, and I'm just going to call it Libertarian Votes. It's going to be an area feature, and I'll say OK to that. And then when I double click on it, I can start editing it. First thing you need to do is you select the area, and that's going to be that precinct layer that we're working with for the 2014 data, and say OK to that. The next thing I am going to do is I'm going to batch generate rules up here. So I'm going to click on that batch generate rules up here, and then I have to choose the attribute that I want. And if I click on that and scroll all the way to the bottom, that's where my %libertarian is. And I can load that data right there. And now it shows up. And it's using right now the equal interval method. If you want, you can take a look at the data, which is pretty cool and works a little bit better actually than ArcGIS Pro does, to visualize it, to see how you might change this if you want to. And you can see right now what we're doing in equal interval is we're going to give that dark color only to a few precincts that are at the very end. The majority are going to be these lighter colors. And we might not want that. We might want to change things around a little bit, and we might want to use, for example, natural breaks and take a look at that and see where we end up with the natural breaks. This will put a few more precincts in the very darker color. It's up to you, and again, this is where we get to that principle of figuring out how you want your map to lie, what you want it to show and what you don't want it to show. I'm going to stick with this one now. I sort of like this one. You can always flip things around too if you want to as well. The next thing I need to do though, after I've selected the classification number, and I should say the number of data classes, and I've chosen 5 data classes right here, and I'm actually going to reduce the decimals down to 1, because then it's going to be a little bit easier to display on the map itself. I am going to go ahead and begin to select the fill. And I do that by collecting set fill. And then see this little swatch symbol right here, or ramp mode it's called. Click on that, and then you should be able to go down here and choose whatever swatch you asked for down here. And it will automatically assign those swatches up here. You can reverse the color ramp if you want to, but I do not want to do that. You could, if you wanted to here as well, change things like the opacity of the fill and the stroke weight of the boundary boxes and all that. I have mine set at 0.01 or something really small like that, or I will do that eventually. So I'm just going to do that sort of overall without actually using the batch processing. When that's done, when I'm done and ready to go, I can just go ahead and say add, and then I can apply it. And I'm going to treat all the layers as if they were unlocked. And if I've done it correctly, voila, now I have the map filled in with the colors I wanted to. And you can see here that the map lines are quite thick. That's what I was talking about before. And I have figured out that it's easiest just to select everything and go to the properties. And when you go into those properties with everything selected, you should be able to change it to something that is a much smaller size of outlines. But if you don't want to do it that way, or if it's not quite working, and I'm not sure mine is working the way that I want it to, it's no problem. I can actually go back to the map themes down here and select that and go back to the batch rules and edit them and go change that stroke weight. And right now it's at 1 point, which is pretty big. And I actually have found that for these data, we want them really small, or they're quite big and sort of obnoxious. So I'm going to make them 0.01 and apply that and lock this. And it did not take for some reason, it looks like. So I'm going to have to figure that one out. Okay, I figured out what I was doing, and I'm leaving the error in the video just so you can see that I'm as much of an adult as we all are. And what I'm doing here is I still have this visible right up here. So watch what happens. I'm going to lock this right here, lock this layer, and now I'm going to make this invisible, that 2020 layer. And now we go down to those much thinner weight of lines, which is what I wanted in the first place. But I just had that old stuff there sort of in the way. So anyhow, hopefully I'm not going to have that problem. And if I zoom down in here, I should find a relatively low weight all the way down to the very finest layer as well, which is actually what I want. But this raises actually the next big question, and that is, you know, this looks bad, right? This is Cook Inlet, and these precincts extend out into the middle of it, and we don't want it to look that way. So how can we fix that so it's not going to look that way? And to do that, we are going to apply what is called a clipping mask. Okay, so to do this clipping mask, the first thing you should do is lock everything up. It doesn't matter if that other layer is, but I'm going to zoom all the way out so we can see everything. Okay, and here we are zoomed out. There's that artboard. I never properly made that bigger, so I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. So we have a little bit of wiggle room on each side of the map. Okay, now what I'm going to do, since we can see everything, is I'm actually going to make my precincts invisible as well. And I'm going to unlock the coastline, and I'm going to go up here to the selection tool, and I'm going to select everything. That's going to select the whole outline. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to Object right here, and from Object menu, I'm going to go down to Compound Path, and then I'm going to make it. And let me show you why I'm doing that. If we take a look at what we've got here, we've got a whole bunch of paths. They're like many, many little line segments. And we just want one line segment. So if I go back to that object, and then down at the bottom is compound path, you can't quite see it. Go to that and say make. It will take all of this, and let's look at it now, and it's just one compound path, which is what we want. Okay, now we can go ahead and make our precinct stuff visible again. And let's zoom back down in here to Cook Inlet so we can see what's happening. Number one, the coastline's thick again. We don't want that big, thick coastline. So I'm going to modify that as well via the properties. And I'm going to change it from a stroke of 1 point to 0.01 as I did before on the batch generating rules. And go back to the layer here, and let's just see if that worked. Yep, that worked perfectly, just what I wanted it to do. And now what I am going to do is I am going to drag the compound path, not the area, but the compound path right here into the election, into the precinct layer. So expand that whole thing, take that compound path and put it right at the top. There it is. Now what I want to do is I want to select the whole layer. So everything's selected here. And this time I'm going back to that object layer, menu rather. And this time I'm going down to clipping mask, which again is just off the screen. And I'm going to select make. and it says it's very complex. It may cause the document to fail, blah, blah, blah. Do we want it anyway? Yes. And then look what has magically happened. If we lock these layers, you can see that now Cook Inlet is not showing. But we also seem to have a little bit of a problem with exactly what that compound layer is looking like too, because not everything is outlined the way that it should be. So we're going to have to fix that up probably by going back here, unlocking all that, going to just the clipping path. And when we're just back at that clipping path, go to the stroke. And we're going to make it black. But we're going to, again, make it very small. I've been enjoying 0.01. And then if I go back and relock it, then we can see the outline of Cook Inlet just like we're supposed to. And that's where we're going to stop after this very long video here. So we'll see that. We'll start with the next one next.